Welcome back to the 2024 Cross Labs workshop After Babel, the quest for universal communication. So today we are on our fourth session. But of course, maybe we should do a little bit of a recap first. So far we've talked a lot about universal communication because there's so many subtopics within that, I guess, very wide range of subjects. It's such a huge idea, right? Can anything or anyone talk to anything else or anyone else? So far we've been talking about talking to aliens and the mathematics of communication. We've also been talking about talking to cells and animals and plants and fungi and bees and things like that. And yesterday what we did was we talked about how our senses and our embodiments and our way that we perceive the world really affects the way that we're able to communicate. And so today, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking a little bit about, well, not a little bit, but a lot about of what counts as an agent. So, a lot of the agents that we encounter in everyday life are kind of obvious, like other people, right? Yourself, you're probably an agent. Bees, animals, plants, those are all probably agents. But what about other things too? I mean, is the air an agent? Probably not. But what about a sock puppet, for example? Maybe this sock puppet? Is it an agent? Of course I'm an agent. What are you, crazy? I can talk and I have goals. Goals? What kind of goals could you possibly have? You're a sock puppet. I'm going to be America's next top model. Are you serious? You're attached to my arm. How in the world are you going to walk down the runway when you're attached to my arm? Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just a crazy idea that you had this morning for the workshop. Don't say that. People are going to think I'm crazy. You are crazy. You know what? Let's just forget about that sock puppet. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk to some experts that aren't a sock puppet. And we're also going to have a moderated discussion. So just to recap the format of today's session a little bit, we're going to have panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a discussion among the panelists. Then we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we are going to open up the discussion and just see where it goes after that. So if you're watching on YouTube Live and you have questions, then you can ask those questions in the chat, and I'll be your liaison to pass those questions along to the panel. All right, so without further ado, I'm now going to pass it on to our moderator, Olaf Witkowski.
Hi, very nice to be here today. Thank you, Alyssa. We have an amazing panel today to talk about agents, goals, how communication changes everything, or maybe nothing. So we have four people besides me: Kai Arulkamaran, Martin Biehl, Paul Colognese, and Nathaniel Virgo. And I suggest maybe we just start with going around and maybe giving a short self-introduction, and maybe say why we're interested in agency, each of us, and then we'll start discussing. So maybe let's start with Kai Arulkamaran. He's at Araya in Tokyo. Hi, Kai.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm currently a researcher at Araya, which is based in Tokyo. We work on sort of neuroscience and AI research. Just to give a little bit of background about myself, I did my postgrads at Imperial College London, where I was largely focused on deep reinforcement learning. So deep learning, I did a bunch of that. Reinforcement learning, I did a bunch of that. And then I joined Araya because I was sort of interested in moving a little bit to the intersection of neuroscience and AI. And at the moment, my research is largely focused around robotics and brain-machine interfaces. So my sort of job description is to try and control robots with my brain, which I think is a fantastic job description. It's obviously very hard. So I guess my relevance to this panel is maybe not so much about the detecting an agent or the goal directedness, but I've spent a lot of my research career working with agents and trying to get them to do intelligent stuff and follow goals, and largely been interested in the literature around that. So for me, I'll create an agent. It's a sort of deep learning neural network. It's going to be embodied in an environment. It's going to go ahead and like try and accomplish goals as, through a pure reward function, or maybe we're giving it goals. And, I worked on a lot of sort of like video games and maybe like simulated robotics, but now I'm working in robotics and human robot interactions. So, the challenges that we're facing is sort of, like how do we get agents to work robustly towards goals and like understand what goals are. So this is particularly relevant working in human robot interaction. So, for example, if I, tell a robot, can you go and tidy the table? That's a lot of information that it has to work out about, what are the preferences? What does it mean to, tidy up a table? There's a lot of common sense understanding that needs to happen. And then, of course, like, nothing's going to be perfect, and humans have preferences. So in that sense, we might need to initiate a dialogue with humans to say, oh, I don't know what to do in this situation. Can you help me out? And then the human needs to, provide some information to help them out. And really, for a human, we can very easily infer, right? Like what goals or what, other people or maybe animals are trying to achieve. But this doesn't come, for free with neural networks, for example. Like they can latch on to all sorts of things in the data which just really don't represent what humans might think. So for example, if we ask it to tidy the table and it sees demonstrations of people like, taking objects from a table and putting them away somewhere, it might well just sort of, just wipe its arm over the table and put everything on the floor, right? Because everything is off the table and it's tidy. But a human would not, break everything on the table. But, the robot doesn't understand that. The AI systems don't understand that. So yeah, I guess, I'm quite interested to hear, what the other panelists have to say about, agency and in particular goals, because, I think this is something that's going to be very relevant, is currently very relevant for us in society. One, with with all of these LLMs out there, we want to talk to them. People talk about alignment. Can they understand what our goals are and help us with that? And especially nowadays, robotics is really coming into the forefront. And again, if we have agents acting in the real world, it's super important, right, that they can, understand the common sense and the intricacies that come with goals. So I guess maybe that's the sort of thing that I'm interested in.
Amazing. And yeah, thank you for sort of highlighting how current this topic is, and how control of robots and contact with LLMs and so on is super important. Let's address that very soon. Perhaps next, let's go to Nathaniel Virgo, who is honoring us of his presence here in the office. And Nathaniel is from the Earth Life Science Institute at Tokyo Tech in Tokyo. Welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe hold that close
Hold
to
this
yeah.
close. Okay. Anyway, right. So I guess I'll just quickly hold it here. Okay. So I'm Nathaniel Virgo. Yeah, my background originally is in computer science and mathematical ecology, but for a long time I've been interested in artificial life and in the origin of life, which means understanding how life arose on the Earth about 4 billion years ago. So I've been interested in agency kind of from that perspective for a long time. So from the perspective of kind of autopoiesis, like understanding what is a cell, like what makes cells different from non-living things. And I suppose that for many years I thought that was an inherently non-mathematical thing to think about, that you just couldn't really do maths to do with that. It's too hard. But more recently, I've been kind of becoming more and more of a mathematician again, and in particular learning category theory. And this is leading me to take the attitude that there are bits you can bite off this incredibly difficult problem and say concrete things about. So that's the kind of direction that my research is going in at the moment. And then specifically, I got really interested in the question of agency, like what does it mean to say something as an agent? Because partly because, in a sense, agency is the thing that sets biology apart from the non-living world. I mean, I don't think there is like a fundamental difference between living and non-living matter or anything like that. We're all part of the same physical continuum. But when you look at everything inside a cell has a job to do, right? I mean, even evolution is the result of biological activity. There are enzymes that replicate DNA. It doesn't replicate itself. So yeah, somehow the transition from non-life to life was really the emergence of agency was either at its core or a hugely important part of it. So that's kind of the answer to the question of why do you care about agents? And then specifically at the moment, I'm really interested in the question, well, I think I kind of have a partial answer to the question of whether there's a link between having a goal and having beliefs, because it's kind of like mysterious that these things come together, right? Agents have goals, but they also generally have beliefs or models of the world in some sense. And what do those things really have to do with each other? So kind of feel together with Martin as well, who's also here, that we kind of have a fairly good partial answer to that. Another really interesting question is, where do you draw the boundary of an agent? I mean, that's been a question that I've been interested in for a really long time. You know, should we say my boundary lies at my skin, or should we say it only includes my brain, or should we say that actually my notebook and my iPad are a part of me in a sense as well? And well, I kind of think I have an answer to that, which is that it doesn't matter, but it kind of matters, and whatever, might get into it later. And then the last thing I wanted to say was that I think there are value judgments involved in saying whether something's an agent or not. Like, I don't think there are things in the world that are agents and things that aren't. So this is a view that comes partly from Daniel Dennett, the work of Daniel Dennett. So I want to, like, in dealing with these things mathematically, I want to make those value judgments really explicit, to say, like, you know, if we draw the boundary here, then this is what we can say about the agent, rather than trying to quantify, like, what's the best place to draw the boundary. So but instead to try and understand how it makes a difference. But I'm not going into any detail about these things, but if they come up later, I can say a lot more about them. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you, Nathaniel. And yeah, definitely the conversation about tools that would allow us to answer those questions about what is a goal, what is a belief, and maybe in particular category theory is something we would like to touch on. And yeah, there are several people in the room who are very interested in that. Maybe let's go next to Paul Colognese, initially from a mathematician from Warwick, and now affiliated to different entities, including with several other people in the virtual room, to the Center for the Study of Apparent Cells. And yeah, focusing on alignment, I understand, these days.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Olaf. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be on this panel already. I've really been enjoying the conference so far. So yeah, so like Olaf said, my background's in mathematics, geometry, and dynamical systems. And then after I had a lot of freedom during my PhD, so I spent some time thinking about various other interesting topics, and the idea of agency and goals started to become more and more prevalent in my mind. And yeah, after thinking about what to do next, I came across this new emerging field of AI alignment, which is basically the study of the problem that maybe in the near future, if we have powerful agentic AI systems that have goals that are misaligned from human goals, or they just have, you know, bad goals, whatever that means, then we might be in a lot of trouble, because if they're very powerful, if they're very intelligent, then they can steer the world according to their preferences and potentially against our preferences. So yeah, so for about a year and a half or 2 years, I've been working on the AI alignment problem, or like learning more about it and getting more and more interested in that. And yeah, to me, the way to ensure that things go well is we need the ability to measure what the goals of these powerful AI systems are, so that we can, you know, evaluate them. Oh, you know, is it trying to, you know, do something bad? Is it trying to make some kind of bioweapon, or is it doing what we, you know, would like it to do? So that's the main thrust of my research. Now, more specifically, I'm concerned about the problem of deception or scheming in AI systems. And this is something that all the big AI labs are concerned about. The idea is that, well, if we have an open communication channel with these AI systems, then we can see what their goals are. We can, speak to them, like say some kind of future version of ChatGPT, or what are your goals? And it can say, oh, I'm trying to make a bioweapon. We can shut it down, and then, that's fine. But that kind of communication breaks down when AI systems start to hide their goals, start to hide their true intentions from us. And yeah, that's very problematic if they are pursuing like truly misaligned goals. And so my research investigates, can we detect AI systems goals by scanning their brains, so to speak, and seeing like whether their true goals are represented there, and yeah, whether we can sort of break past that potential barrier to communication. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I'm interested in.
Amazing. And that's a very nice bridge between this conversation and what we discussed yesterday about private information to an agent, right? And how we can read. And we were focusing more on human cognition yesterday, but today we're focusing really on any agent and read the mathematical structures behind that would allow us to figure this out. Our last but not least panelist today is our very own Martin Biehl, who is a senior scientist with us here at Cross Labs, who has worked on many ways to identify agents.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Martin. Thank you, Olaf. Yeah, so I originally studied physics, and I thought, okay, that's really nice. We can use all these. We can use a lot of math to say what the universe is, or at least kind of get close to it. But then after this, after kind of finishing my physics degree, I was like, okay, but what if we had the final grand unified theory? What would that actually tell me about myself or ourselves? And the in my opinion, kind of the most interesting things in this universe, which are the living things. And I kind of realized that basically I wouldn't learn anything. Like if I had this grand unified theory in front of me, the equations for it, and even if I would understand it, it wouldn't tell me what a living thing is. And so I kind of took that as a sign that I should maybe think about other things. And one thing I became focused on is this notion of agency, because it seemed like living things have this property and of agency, and that it's kind of maybe also the kind of difficult thing to imagine when you are trained as a physicist, because you kind of say, okay, maybe the universe is a dynamical system, and so the laws of the universe determine everything that happens inside of it. And then agents, though, are these kind of things that are supposed to be doing things themselves for their own purposes. And that seems almost like a contradiction to the laws of the universe determining everything. And so I kind of thought, okay, how can we see these two things as compatible? Like, how can we formulate a notion of agent that keeps actually that kind of like not explain them away in a sense, but like explain really what agents are, but in such a way that they still can exist in like even a deterministic universe, or more abstractly in some kind of dynamical system. And so this question has haunted me ever since. And recently, I think we've made some significant progress, at least to kind of understanding what agents are in under some specific circumstances, not in full generality, I think, but at least we have like some ideas of like if we are given some kind of system with inputs and outputs, which one of those, like how to see them as an agent, or what you kind of need or what are the ingredients to kind of view such a system as an agent, or yeah. And so I'm pretty excited about this, and I think hopefully we will get further progress. And yeah, that's my introduction. Thank you.
Amazing. And we are really deep into the topic already. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you surprise questions about what we just talked about. This is widely unprepared on purpose. But we'll talk about all the stuff that you've been preparing for in your own research. So that kind of makes sense. I'm going to ask the first question to Nathaniel, and it's going to be broadly the same kind of topic all around about what is the nature of a goal. So Nathaniel, what does it mean for, I guess, any agent to have a goal, and what is maybe in your particular case the distinction, if you want now, or that can come later, between a goal and a belief?
Okay, sure. So yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, I think these things are to some extent value judgments. In that we as observers judge agents to be following goals or not, right? So my colleague Simon McGregor always likes to come up with these like examples that seem trivial and annoying, like where along the lines of this bottle here is trying to fall through the table, but it can't. The table's in a way, like, too bad for the bottle. It can't achieve its goal, right? And the point is that this is actually a perfectly fine story to tell. There's nothing stopping Simon from if he was here, from making such a claim. We can't argue that it's not really trying to do that. But telling that story doesn't tell us anything about the bottle. It doesn't kind of give us any purchase on the system. Whereas if I try and think of the people here as agents, why are they doing what they're doing? They're probably trying to understand what I'm saying. Maybe they're thinking about something someone else has said. That kind of explains why they're sitting quietly. So, and that does tell me quite a lot about it. Helps me to predict their future behavior, which I could still do. I could predict so this is Dennett's idea of the intentional stance. I could predict Olaf's future behavior purely using the laws of physics, if only I had this like massive X-ray machine or whatever, so that I could, in this huge computer, so that I could simulate all his atoms and I'd be able to predict his behavior. But that would be really, really hard. But if I judge him to be trying to pursue a goal, that helps me to predict his behavior in a much easier way. And so the fact that Olaf is a biological system, a human being, kind of makes that possible. So the judgment that things follow goals is kind of like, it belongs to me as an observer, because I can't really know what's going on in Olaf's head. And in a sense, the only thing going on in Olaf's head is a bunch of atoms moving according to the laws of electromagnetism. But if I judge him to be following a goal, that's helpful. And so that's something that I think the value judgment inherent in that is unavoidable, and we need to account for it mathematically. You asked also about the relationship between goals and beliefs. And that one, in a sense, is much easier. So once you accept the notion that the goals are a judgment, right? So I've got this system, I've got like this robot or something that I'm observing, and I notice that it is able to solve the maze and find the cheese or whatever. I don't know why a robot wants cheese, but whatever. So I assign that as a goal, but then there might be some tasks. I guess a maze isn't really the best one. Well, maybe it kind of is, right? Because you got to know, like, have you been this way before, right? So if you want to solve a maze and it's got lots of dead ends, you've got to be able to remember something about where you've been before, and so there's a relationship between goals and beliefs wait a second, this is actually quite difficult to explain. So, okay. you have this system, it's able to achieve this goal. It may be the case that the internal state of the system is correlated with the state of the external world, right? But that need not be anything to do with beliefs or anything, right? That because correlations can just happen. Lots of things can cause correlations. So it's not like, in my opinion, it's not enough to just talk about correlations. But it may be that some of those correlations are actually necessary for performing the task. If those correlations were not there, then the task they wouldn't be able to achieve the task. And when that's the case, I think there is a way that this is what we're working on now. It's quite close to being finished. That there is a way, when that is the case, to kind of semantically interpret the state of the agent. So we can, again, this is a value judgment. I can attribute beliefs. Right? I can think that Olaf believes that there's a chair in the other room or whatever. And that's, again, a value judgment that I make about Olaf. But the point is that when there are goals involved, these attributions of beliefs are sometimes not optional. So you can kind of say, whenever this agent can achieve this goal, it must be possible to attribute beliefs to it about the information it needs to know to achieve the goal. So it was a bit of an ad hoc explanation, and I'm not entirely sure how clear it was, but that's roughly my view on the relationship between goals and beliefs at the moment.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense, and that's a very good starting point for us. Maybe I'd like to go next to Kai, if that's all right. And yeah, maybe asking the same. What is a goal, and maybe how does the representation of goals in what you do help us control, let's say, another agent, let's say a robot, and yeah, how does our understanding of goals help us control?
Sure. So, I wish I had a good answer, but it's definitely one of these things where it's like, oh, if you see it, you know it, right? It's one of these things, I think, where like, oh, if someone gives you an example of a goal, you can kind of work out, oh yeah, is that a goal or is that not a goal? But it is very, very difficult to sort of, really classify what sort of thing it is. I would say, if jumping a little bit back to maybe this idea of like, oh, what's beliefs versus goals. I guess one thing about goals I'd say is, I believe there should be some directedness and probably some action involved, right? So, you might have belief about a lot of things, right? You might have knowledge about a lot of things, but if you have a goal, it sort of implies that, oh, there is some actions you can be taking in order to achieve this, right? So I think this would hold for, very short-term goals, like, I want to have my coffee. Okay, well, I reach over and grab the coffee. To long-term goals, like, I want to have a successful career. So this, means I spend many, many years studying, right? And this is, I think, a sort of thing that applies. Is like, oh, I have to do something actively. I need to take actions in order to achieve this thing. And then that's, I think, how, one important fact about goals. Yeah, and I think maybe jumping back a little bit to what I was talking about earlier, there is and I think this sort of subtlety of, especially working with robots and maybe even LLMs, like, what is common sense for humans? Like, common sense knowledge is a concept that's been talked about in AI. So, I think this is something that maybe we need to consider when we talk about goals, particularly in a very pragmatic sense. I mentioned this idea of like, okay, if the goal is to tidy up the table, then in a sense that would be to like remove, all the items from the top of the table. But common sense would put some constraints that, you don't break the items that are on it, right? Is that part of the goal? Like, is the goal like clean the table, but don't break anything, but don't do this, but don't do that, but do it this way? Or is that something that, we maybe consider as general constraints on behavior, something like that, right? So yeah, I guess that's the final bit of my answer.
Very good, very good. And this already asks very difficult questions. What is this common sense, and I guess what is this? What is sense context at all have to do with those goals? And maybe Martin, I'd like to ask you next. under the same big question of what's a goal, we seem to be coarse graining the micro model of reality, right? What Nathaniel, I heard, was talking about, those atoms around, into something that is more manageable. In a sense, we sort of compress reality into those more simple goals, and maybe that's a human or limited computational agent or cognitive agent, what they are capable of doing. But as you coarse grain this, what's this link with this context? And I guess, yeah, it could have this situational sort of constraints that Kai is talking about. It could be something different, right? It doesn't have to be human. How do we coarse grain reality into those very limited macro states?
Yeah, okay. I mean, okay, so the thing I kind of want to say about this, and I'll try to come back to this question then at the end. But the first thing I want to say is, like, yeah, you can. So when you can kind of say everything has a goal, like Nathaniel also kind of alluded to this before, because you can always say the goal of something is to do exactly what it's doing. This seems to generally be working, and that also works in the way, I think, in our kind of more formal frameworks we have, that seems to also always work. So, and I think we have to accept it. Like but somehow this kind of lacks something that we want from goals. Like Nathaniel mentioned that you want to maybe use goals to predict things. And if this kind of goal that just says, okay, whatever this thing's doing is exactly what it's trying to do, then that's true for the water bottle. It's true for the sock puppet. It's true for anything. So, but it's what it's kind of lacking is maybe this thing that you referred to when you said compression, because it does not really let you predict something. It does not make something simpler for you, or it doesn't make it simpler for you to predict something. And so I think kind of the non-trivial goals and the interesting goals, and also following from that, the interesting agents, are those where you have some kind of simple thing that's maybe kind of far removed from what you can kind of observe directly, or something. Like Kai mentioned this goal that you want to be successful, so you're gonna go study and something. So this seems to be kind of like a goal far removed from the current reality, and those kind of goals, they are like more, maybe they're more interesting, and the agents that pursue those goals are more interesting, or more like, yeah, they're more interesting agents. Like, because like if we, yeah, like I said, in this, there's this one view where even the water bottle is an agent. Every weird sub-volume of our universe is an agent. It's trying to do exactly what it's doing. So, but the interesting things are those that have these kind of compressed, non-immediate goals. I don't really know yet what the right formal notion of this, like what's the correct formal term notion of being a compressed goal or far removed goal is yet, but that's kind of the idea. So does that answer the question about coarse graining? Maybe a little bit. I think the one thing I want to know, maybe want to add, is that it doesn't really need to be a coarse graining of anything real. Like those goals don't need to be real things. Like you can have a very strange model of the world that's very far from maybe what the world really is, and you can have a goal that exists inside this strange model of the world, and you can act optimally in order to achieve it, and therefore be an agent. And even somebody else that knows that you have this strange goal that doesn't exist can actually use this strange goal and in order to predict your behavior. So I always use this example of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Like, that thing doesn't exist, but if some people can go and try to go there and do something, and other people can even kind of predict something about these people's behavior. Yeah, that's, I think, goals are not necessarily constrainings of anything in the physical world. Let's say, I guess, maybe.
Mm-hmm. But do they help us predict the physical world? Because you kind of said both.
Well, yeah, they will help you predict the behavior of the agent, which is probably a part of the physical world. So yeah, that's kind of funny, but it's right, I think.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'd like to ask Paul next, but I'll change it up, and I want to know about the human bias. Because I've heard in some of the wording we're using, it feels like those goals are, and I guess that's what humans have been doing for millennia and much more. It's to personifying, anthropomorphizing, I guess, everything. That's something I do on a daily basis, and it sort of helps me think about reality, to think that they are little agents, and in the worst case they're not. And I tried something. Maybe we spiritify also a lot of things, in a sense that, oh yeah, this is, and of course while programming I definitely talk to my code a lot. Is there something about our conception of goals that is human biased by our own, I guess, our own goals, as opposed to any goals? And is there a distinction between them? The easiest question is for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I guess so. Sorry, and of course, please tell us also about what you consider as a goal.
Sure. I think, yeah, when I think about goals, I don't tend to think about them in a human bias way. Okay, that's not necessarily true of everyone, but I almost feel like agency is such a basic category that it's very yeah, okay, maybe it's just the way I think about agents. Like, I think about goals as being like there being a very large space of goals, human goals as most, okay, yeah, maybe I feel like a lot of human goals are sort of general goals that general agents will have, and maybe a lot of our goals can be framed in terms of goals that, yeah, aliens would have, and so on and so forth. Obviously, we have particulars to our condition as human beings. We have physical bodies, we have reproductive systems, yeah, various things like that. But yeah, I tend to think that a lot of our goals would be shared with aliens or AI systems, but maybe the particulars and the details, there might be differences there. So yeah. Yeah, does that answer your question, or do you want to ask something?
Can you elaborate on the embodiment part? How tied are we to our embodiments for our goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe two directions that I would go in. Well, yeah, okay, let me think. One thing is that a lot of our goals are about the states of the universe. Like, we want the world to be in certain configurations, and we need to take actions in order to steer the world according to those preferences. And so we need to do this through our body. Another thought is that, well, because we're bounded agents, we have like a limited amount of computation to apply due to our constraints of our bodies, then that constrains the kind of goals that we can comprehend and the kind of computations we can do to achieve goals. So you mentioned coarse graining before. So because our brains are of limited capacity, it's very unlikely for systems like us to have goals about, you know, the microstate of the universe and like far away from us, for example. So that kind of constrains the kinds of goals that we would develop and the kind of goals that we could pursue. And then I guess, yeah, just another idea which comes to my mind is that, yeah, what to do with my research is that because we're embodied, because we do computation in order to select actions, our goals probably have to have some kind of representation within our body, which I think is quite interesting. And yeah, and that's like the kind of thing I'm working on. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered any particular question that you had in mind there, but those are just some thoughts about embodiment and goals.
Yeah, I think you've asked additional helpful questions,
Okay.
which is helpful to me. What I'd like to do is bring that perspective, because we're already talking about how goals are sort of embodied, or at least anchored in a certain framework that has a structure. And I wonder how, yeah, what it's like, because we talk, of course, about goals being someone with goals ourselves. So I think this is a good time to bring in the communication part. And this can come from any part. So feel free to raise your hand or virtual hand if whenever you have something to say about this. But yeah, what do we think about communication between agents, and how do we think about that being tied to those goals? Can we understand goals with communication, and what is it like to understand goals without it? Yeah, Nathaniel.
Yeah, so I guess I wonder whether something is relevant here that I've been thinking about also with Martin for a long time, and also with Simon McGregor, that communication in some sense is like really fundamental to what it is to be an agent and to have goals. And that's because memory is a form of communication, right? In order to tell myself what to do in the future, I have to somehow tell myself what I'm going to do, right? Like I have to tell myself what I've seen. So there's a communication channel from me, which is this agent here at this time, to me, which is another agent tomorrow. And we have to agree on a communication protocol, which is a difficult thing to do. Agreeing on communication protocols is a hard problem. And somehow there's some game theory involved. Like we also have to agree what we're trying to do. Like, you know, one of us could blow the other one off, and then we won't achieve, like, you know, if I really want to do something in 2 days time, but then me tomorrow gets up and decides to do something else, that's not going to happen, right? So if we want to coherently sustain a goal, especially these kind of long-term goals that Martin was talking about, then, you know, there's something going on there about the communication between these things that we can think of as different agents making just different decisions at different periods in time for potentially slightly different reasons that have to somehow cohere together to form an agent.
Excellent. And this framing of communication as memory is super helpful. It means really it's fundamental. I cannot imagine anything without a sort of code of it that would be sufficient for systems to have goals. Yeah, any reaction from the virtual room?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, like, I agree. Now, I wanted to kind of say something in response to what Paul said before, and also maybe what Kai said before. I'm gonna maybe try to shoehorn something about communication in there. I don't know. So the thing is that yeah. So Kai mentioned that we have trouble telling the robot what the goal is, or like we have trouble if we tell the robot what the goal is, like the table has to be clean. Then the robot will just wipe everything off the table, and that's of course not what we want. And then he asked the question whether the goal involves all these constraints. And I think, yeah, like the amazing thing is, or the reason these things work extremely well with humans is kind of that we seem to have really very similar beliefs about the world, and or like similar, I'm going to say similar models of the world, like that seems to be, and but also beliefs about this model, and that seems to kind of really make our communication much easier. And so somehow, if you tell a human to move the stuff off the table, they don't want to destroy stuff. It's kind of their, maybe they have a value. They also assign value to things not being broken anyway. And so I guess that means that they have the goal of the things not being broken anyway. Like everybody kind of has this, or like at least a large proportion of the people have this kind of thing, and that makes, so we have these kind of very similar beliefs, and that also makes it I think also makes it so much easier for us to predict other humans by assigning, like by using goals, because we get a lot for free because we kind of can assume, often correctly, that the model that this other human uses of the world is very similar to the model that I have of the world. It's not going to be the same, but and I think that makes to come back to communication, that probably makes communication a lot easier.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Anything else? I'm seeing that Kai has a.
Yeah, so continuing on that, I think this is something that I was going to say. I think when it comes to communication, then shared beliefs make communication much more efficient, right? Like, so the more shared beliefs, shared values that you have, the much more easier it is to communicate. And I think, as was discussed, like this is how we can more efficiently communicate goals amongst humans. And, to a certain extent, I think we could do the same between humans and animals. Like if you see, like a cheetah chasing an antelope, you would probably infer that the cheetah, needs to eat, right? It's hungry, it needs to eat, and that's why it's, chasing the prey. And the sort of, at least in this case, the thing that is shared is, everything's embodied. And elephant in the room, the horrible word that no one can really define well, grounding, right? Like you'd say that, things are sort of grounded in reality. We're having the shared experience embodied in the physical world. And that's really enabling, humans, even other animals, to sort of like make inferences about, the goals of themselves, the goals of other creatures, etc. So yeah, actually, I want to riff off this and ask Paul a question, which was, do you think we can determine the goals of an agent if it's not grounded? Like if we have an LLM and, you ask it, how are you doing? Are you doing good? And it's an LLM, right? And it says, oh, I'm great. I just dropped off the kids at school. And that's absolutely no reflection of reality, right? It's not a real thing. It's just a piece of software, but it's just parroting like this thing, right? So, it's telling you this thing. What are goals for this? Can we even, say that this thing has goals if it doesn't have a reflection of reality?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think to me, goals ground out as outcomes in reality. So if we, maybe it's not always easy to measure this, but suppose we let the LLM loose and then we follow it around and then we see, oh, it's, taking its kid to school today or whatever. Then we're like, okay, yeah, that was its goal. And then, maybe if we try it again the next day and we implement some perturbations, we block off that particular route to school and it still manages to take its kid to school, then yeah, that would be some indication that it's trying to steer the world into that kind of outcome, that particular outcome. And then that's one way of grounding whether it has a goal or not. Obviously, there are like complications there because there's like subjective views about, what is its kind of target state and that kind of thing. But yeah, to me, when I think about agency and goals, and in particular about alignment, it's like, well, what we're concerned about is the outcome in reality and whether that system is like trying to steer the world towards that particular outcome. Yeah, I'm not sure. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess then one question is, again, like a difficult thing is, I think this then becomes an issue of agency. Like, what does it mean for an agent to want something, right? Like, does the LLM really want something to happen, or is it just, taking in inputs and giving outputs and it's heading in a certain direction, but does it want it?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that. Yeah, maybe again, I'll just reiterate, for my purposes, it's ultimately about the grounding in reality. So it's like, okay, does it want it? Does it not want it? What we're concerned about is like, does it achieve it robustly? And then about whether it really wants it, then one could try looking at the internals of the LLM, which is sort of the kind of stuff that I'm interested in. And maybe if we knew what kind of algorithm it was running to produce outputs, then we could say, oh, it's doing some kind of planning algorithm, and it's modeling the world, it's simulating outcomes of actions. And then when it looks at those various actions that it could take and it looks at the resulting outcomes, then it's applying some kind of evaluation function to be like, oh, this is a good outcome, this is a bad outcome, and so on and so forth. And then that kind of the presence of that would indicate to me that, yeah, there is some kind of wanting there. And, this is an anthropomorphized version of saying that, but there is some kind of like value and selection and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking, about this question of like, do LLMs have goals, or how do we detect if they have goals or something like that? And I guess when GPT 3.5 came out, I was kind of excited by it, and I would did a whole lot of experiments with the API trying to get it to behave in an agency way, as I'm sure hundreds and hundreds of other people did at the same time. And I think my takeaway from that really is that it's actually quite difficult to get them to behave like agents. It's very difficult to get them. So it's very difficult to get them to behave in a sustained way, as if they are trying to achieve a goal. And this is also true of GPT-4. I mean, it's much better, and it's had a lot of fine tuning to make it better at that. I believe perhaps it even has like extra stuff, but. Yeah, what am I trying to say? So the agent, I think there's it's like a funny question if you think of the LLM as an agent that's going to have a goal. No, I kind of don't think it will. I mean, not for a fundamental reason. I mean, that could potentially happen in some kind of an emergent way or whatever. But the AI agents that people make using GPT-4 or whatever LLM, the LLM is a component, and there's a bunch of scripting and stuff as well, and the agent is all of that, and it's an agent to the extent that it behaves as intended, and that the LLM doesn't just wander off and decide it's trying to do something else or start making up nonsense or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. That thought just sort of came to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. The grounding question, I think I was hoping we would get there, and I was fearing we would get in that. In a sense, let me pose that as a question, which is one of my favorite ones. We touched on that a little bit on Monday when we were talking about alien communication. So anything that has lived, evolved, and grown, learned about their reality, and that is in a very different embodiment and environment and context from ours here on Earth and as humans, might be difficult to make contact with, right? So that's the first contact question. Is there a question, and I heard that from your phrasing, Kai, is there a universal, right, way to communicate about goals? And is there something in that space, and it doesn't have to be goals, but something close to goals that is universally signalable if we were to write a book for creatures that live in very different dimensions with different dynamics? Is there anything that, not that we can assume, but that we can do really to accelerate this warming up session to communicate about goals with them without having the context shared in the first place? And of course, GPT is a bad example for this because their language is really our language, and we shared a lot of the physics. We shared everything. They took our language and now are re-expressing. They're not really disembodied in that sense. They are now sort of less embodied in our sense, but they took the language from us. So, but in this differently embodied situation, what can we do to universally communicate goals? And is that forever impossible?
So I'm gonna cheat a bit to talk about this by going to by talking about models, because that makes things much easier, I think. So Nathaniel before said something like, okay, it seems like every agent, if they're trying to achieve a goal, they will have some sort of beliefs and models of beliefs. And I think so in that sense they are necessary, and I think that's right and also interesting. But you can also, I'm gonna speak as if everything is kind of has a model in some way anyway. That's kind of, or like everything is kind of, you can kind of say everything is like a Bayesian reasoner or something like this that has like beliefs, that has like a model of the things that cause its inputs and updates them and has like beliefs over the hidden states of this model and updates them according to Bayes. So if you let me make this very strong assumption, because I don't think that's actually correct, but then we can think, okay, let's say, so I think if we, like humans seem to have very similar models in this way and similar beliefs. And so we can understand each other's goals probably easily, because your goal, you can express it to me and it also makes sense in my model. Like in my model, it also exists. Like if Kai wants to win the Nobel Prize also exists in my model of the world, and I totally understand. And like I can predict Kai's behavior. He's gonna study a lot. And but like, and even like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow I mentioned before, it kind of still works in my model of the world, even though I know it doesn't exist. But of course, like an alien that has very different, like a different embodiment, or like, yeah, like a really different embodiment, whatever that looks like, might have a very different model of the world and might not understand any of these things. So the question is kind of, even under this very strong assumption that it does actually have a model and updates its beliefs in a Bayesian way, is there a way to communicate? You asked whether there's a way to communicate goals in the, like, that work in all of these, that work for all of these models, basically. So we would maybe, I mean, maybe some of the goals, but it's like, so let's say the Nobel Prize, that's gonna be tough, no? Like if there's no Nobel Prize in the alien society and they don't, I don't know, if they don't, like if they give out prizes, then somehow there should be a way, no? Like then if we would then it seems like, okay, yeah, we just need to figure out a language so that I can refer to price in their language, and then we would like, that would be no problem. But if they kind of have this society or whatever where the prices just don't exist, then we would have to like do something really abstract. Like, then it seems like I'm gonna make a very predictable move here, I think, and say something like, yeah, then like math. They will have the same math anyway. Like, somehow they will probably have game theory anyway, and then can I then talk about the price of the Nobel Prize? I don't know. No, probably not. But yeah, I think I'm not gonna keep going much further. But then, like, yeah, something math.
something
is the
math.
answer. But I'm not like, maybe.
Yeah, so I think this question of like two different organisms having models and like whether there's like some kind of overlap there, some kind of correspondence. There's an interesting idea called the natural abstraction hypothesis, which is the idea that any cognitive system within like the universe will have to start using certain like variables in order to represent the world. Essentially, like the rough idea is that very low level like microstates, that kind of whatever information is there will be destroyed by the time it reaches your sensory apparatus. And so there's like limits to the kind of abstractions that are useful for predicting reality. So in that sense, like maybe if you have like a bunch of aliens or like AIs and humans or whatever in a room, and they're trying to make sense of it, maybe there'll be like some kind of limited set of abstractions that they will be able to use, or that will be useful for modeling the room, in which case there's some kind of like convergence in the models that they have to use. And so there's like some kind of foundation for shared communication there.
Very nice. Maybe one remark from Nathaniel, and I'd like to take a couple of questions just before the break from the room. And
yeah, I mean, I guess echoing something fairly similar. I guess I'm sort of confused because I don't know who these disembodied agents are that we're going to be trying to communicate with. But like, if they're anything that lives in this universe, they'll need to eat, so they'll understand what that is, or electricity or whatever, right? They'll understand what that is. There'll be things they know and things they don't know, so they'll understand what learning is, and they'll probably, if they're trying to communicate with us, they probably want to learn, so they'll understand that as a goal. Like, I think there's like lots of things that are sort of very abstract that kind of almost no matter what you would expect to be, that you would expect to have in common with another agent.
Very nice. This is something I think I must have said on Monday, I think, which is that it was reminiscent of conversations we had at Elsie, actually, with Niche and others. I think that included some of you guys, which is I think I said at that point that if we wanted to communicate with an alien, whatever the alien is, if it's within our universe, then because we know it's an agent, it probably cares about its own sustenance in the future, its autopoiesis, or its own projection of some kind of form of self in its own future. And if that's the only assumption we can make, then at least we can poke at that. So either we help it survive or we dishelp it survive. The way I phrase it is that if you have to communicate with an alien, the only safe way is to try and kill them. But of course, it could be in the other direction. It feels like there are some basic assumptions we're making about this world needing agents in this world needing free energy, and maybe there is no way around that, or some kind of stuff that is similar. I'd love to go a bit more into that later in the free discussion part, but I'd like to take a few questions, and we have a few in the room. I think the first one I saw was from Thomas Doctor from Kathmandu. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Olaf. Thank you, everybody, for this amazing program. Can you hear anything?
Because, yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Very good.
There's a person trying to drill through a wall very near me, so in any case,
Their goals.
yeah, no, I think following very much up on what you just said, Olaf, I was reminded of the model that we have been working with, this stress care intelligence loop, which in my mind, one of the attractive features of that model is that it gives us a way of understanding goals, which seems applicable to any type of agent that, at least that I, with my admittedly very limited imagination, can imagine. So if we say that goals are responses to stress perceptions, where stress is the perception of a mismatch between current and perceived superior circumstances, then there's clearly a situation that demands a response in that perception, and that demand for a response is what we call care, as you know so well. I think that's a candidate, at least, for formulating what a goal is that has that reaches all the instances of agency that I can imagine so far. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Is someone else reacting to that from the room? Oh,
somebody
Alyssa.
on the YouTube chat mentioned that as well.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, yeah.
Karis being a
Would you like? Sorry. Would you like?
Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody mentions that Mike Levin's point from earlier about care being the enabling factor for intelligent goal acquisition, which is, I think, what you were also saying, Thomas, as well.
Yes.
Yes. So just relaying that point. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe this can be like maybe the way to translate this maybe into the picture that Nathaniel and I and Simon McGregor and others are working on is just to kind of say, yeah, like it's about basically you have to have kind of some kind of compassion with your future self as an agent, and that's the only way you're gonna or that's like, in a way, I think what you're saying is kind of that's the origin of goals. And yeah, so I think we are maybe saying that basically this compassion for the future is also necessary to achieve goals. But I'm not sure where I think those two things seem actually compatible to me, but I can't really put my finger on how to make like a unified perspective where it's clear what's first and second, or whether, yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit confused about this. Maybe Nathaniel knows.
I'm not sure. I was going to react to a couple of different things. So, yeah, one is you mentioned the origin of goals. Man, that's a really important topic. We should probably talk about that. But I'll let Olaf lead that maybe after the break. But the other thing I wanted to just bring up was, like, earlier we briefly talked about communication, and then I said, well, you know, being an agent is all about communicating with yourself. We never really talk much about communicating between agents. But it just sort of strikes me that the notion of caring about your future self and the notion of caring about some other individual is really not so different. And so, you know, I think this is like a biological perspective, I suppose. We often like naturally gravitate to this view of agents as these like singular individual things that are fundamentally separate from one another. But within the biological world, that's not always true. Like we humans are quite unusual in the general scheme of things in being extremely individuated. Like it's very difficult to find a situation where you're not sure if it's one person or two. I'm not sure that exists. I'm not sure I know any situation like that. But it's not so hard with trees, right? You know, if you can see two trees that have grown together, or, you know, take a cutting, is it the same tree? So yeah, the partitioning of agents into individuals is somewhat contingent, and maybe caring about others and caring about oneself is kind of fundamental to being an agent. Like there's no fundamental difference in some sense. And then, yeah, maybe there's stuff I could say about what Martin said, but I think I won't, because it gets kind of technical. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We can say a few technical stuff a bit later. I want to hear what the Niche has to say. So Nicholas is from Cross Labs and has their hand raised.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, the kind of sequence of conversation near the end there made me think of something, and I'm not sure I can quite make it concrete, but I'd like to just kind of drop it there as an interesting thing to think about over break, or if someone wants to answer. You know, this discussion about grounding, and especially in the context of Nathaniel's point about the subjectivity of goals, that you can propose a goal, and then you can see if it gives you any kind of explanatory power or any predictive power. It makes me wonder if there's a connection between the idea of grounding and the idea of generalization, you know, like the way we talk about generalization in machine learning. Because in some sense, generalization is a bit magical, where, you know, you have this finite, usually, amount of data and you fit it, and yet somehow that thing works on data that you've never seen before. And that can kind of only be true if the data you've never seen before is, in some kind of loose sense, drawn from the same sort of process as the data you use to train it. There's also stuff like no free lunch theorem, which says that, like, if you knew nothing, you couldn't do anything. Like, if you knew nothing about the world and about what generated the data, then no learning algorithm is going to be better than any other one, because you could be in a universe where, you know, the laws of physics change every second, and, you know, it's or even an adversarial universe that whatever it is you thought you learned from the first, you know, half of your life, the universe explicitly goes out of its way to thwart your predictions from being correct in the second half of your life, and there are infinitely many of those possibilities. And if that's the case, like, I wonder if the kind of the resolution of this grounding paradox is that you almost always have some kind of grounding if you're even talking about the system. It's just not the kind of thing we tend to explicitly verbally recognize. Like, time works the same way for us and an alien. We may perceive it psychologically differently, but, like, we're still embedded in time. You know, the things have light cones, and causation is local, and, you know, like, all of these things, you don't need that many bits of shared grounding to actually, in a no free lunch theorem sense, get a huge amount of generalization power. But I think the more interesting thing is, like, is grounding the same thing as generalization, or are they just like one comes from the other?
Excellent. Any quick reaction? Oh, Kai.
Yeah, so again, like, I'm not sure I can say so much on grounding, but maybe I can give a perspective on generalization, and, you know, maybe at least make that somewhat a little bit more concrete. So, you know, everyone talks about generalization. This is something we want. But how do you define this? Like, how do you define generalization? And I think, yeah, of course, like, if you want to talk about something in more detail, you need to have some definition of what that entails. And I think one of the lines of work that try and sort of formalize the idea of generalization would be referring to causal models. So it's not just that you have any, you know, sort of input-output model, but you have some sort of graphical model of the world, which is modeling, like, the causal distributions going on. And yeah, this is, I think, is going into the no free lunch theorem. Obviously, you know, if you have no priors about what this should be like, then it can be incredibly difficult to come up with the relevant sort of models. And this enables generalization to outside of the data you've seen, in the sense of, if you form the correct model such that there are interventions in the data, in the graph, that could happen, but you've correctly accounted for it in your model. So the sort of very typical example that people give about problems of generalization is, you only see cows in a grassy field, and then if you show a machine learning model like a cow on a beach, it'll get very confused because it's really associated, the being that it's told to classify as a cow as something that's only existing in this grassy area. But of course, if it has the model that this animal exists, and it's actually that the classification is independent of where the environment is, then it's generalized out of distribution. So in this sense, you might try and formalize generalization from saying, okay, there's some causal model of the world, and it means that even if the agent or the model is not seeing all sorts of plots through the data, including the different sorts of interventions, it somehow come up with the correct causal model for the data. And that means when things do happen that it's not seen before, it's able to generalize because of this sort of causal model.
Amazing. I think this might be a good time for us to take a break. But what you just said, I think I really want to continue in the second part of this. So we'll take more questions. Topics I'm thinking we should get into is definitely subjectivity of one agent's goals, generalization, very important, out of distribution, right? And we talk a lot about the capacity of things like LLMs to do math, and in the future, the next candidate of whatever the LLMs will not be, but the next thing could be able to do. I'd like to talk about the butterfly and transferring information to your own future in a useful way, and also the lingua franca of goals. So quite a few things to talk about. Let's take 5 minutes or so at least, and we'll be back. All right, welcome back. And we're talking about goals. We're talking about goals in agents of different types. And we're talking about how to communicate goals within ourselves or with others. And the first thought that I thought I'd put out there for a prompt for how people feel about it is about mathematics. And you mentioned, Martin, earlier about mathematics being a good candidate for universals. And of course, that's still vague because we don't know what mathematics means. But mathematics live in something in our general thinking, right? And maybe mathematics are very human. And there are thoughts about mathematics being either discovered or invented by humans. That's something. And I know that a lot of people have thought a lot about that and written at least 3 books that I know of on the topic. Maybe mathematics are not human and they're agent-based. Maybe they're physics-based. And maybe they're outside the universe. Maybe it's more, maybe in a sort of Platonic or intuitionist interpretation of mathematics is that they are the frame we live in. I was wondering how you felt all about those crazy thoughts.
Yeah, okay. I can connect this a little bit to the previous discussion also. I think so I said before I was talking about these 2 agents, like how to with their models, one of them being like some super weird alien maybe, and the others being us. And then I said, like, yeah, how can they how can they agree on something, or how can we find something in one model that also exists in the other agent's model? And then I said something math. I think that's the thing that came to my mind. Then people here said that, yeah, but there's also this other thing, which is kind of these aliens are going to exist in the same physics, and so they're going to be bound in some way to some. They're going to have some of the same concepts, like they're going to need energy, for example, and these things. So this kind of seems like not the same idea. I mean, like, I guess, and I think that's interesting. Like I realized, okay, yeah, I thought it was just math, but actually there's this other way. And so now we have like these two ways. And yeah, so how is this gonna, so is math discovered? I guess, okay, maybe I want to go back a little bit on this. So is the grounding problem this problem, that how can 2 agents that are kind of maybe update beliefs in the same way but have completely different beliefs can still find something, or where we can kind of guarantee in some way that they have some things inside their models that are the same things in a way. Like, and the candidates now, it seems to me a bit are like, okay, things like energy, food, they're very agenty, maybe directly agenty because they're connected to survival. So maybe that's agenty. Then the other thing is this kind of more abstraction, the abstraction direction, and think like, okay, they will find the same math. Maybe the natural numbers, they're going to exist in both of these, in any kind of sufficiently sophisticated agents model. Yeah. Did I want to say anything about your question? Was I kind of lost a little bit what the question was about, but math is discovered, not invented.
I'm glad that we solved that.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to respond a bit on the question of whether maths is discovered or invented. I guess I also somewhat lost the question though in terms of relation to the topic, but maybe I'll just talk about this anyway. So because it does relate to communication. So yeah, so I think there's like multiple different things that we mean by mathematics. So there are things that are definitely discovered, because like the classic answer to that question that I had when I was a younger person was, well, look, obviously you invent the rules, like the axioms, and then you discover their consequences, right? That's obvious, right? You define the rules of a cellular automaton and you invent that, and then you iterate it forward and you find there are gliders, and you didn't invent those, you discovered those, right? So so then that's easy, that's all solved. But then I'm not sure it is so easy, because although I kind of do still think that those things are definitely discovered and not invented, a lot of the things that mathematicians actually do are about communicating concepts, about understanding something and then communicating that understanding to other people. And they're about finding the right abstractions to describe things. Right. So it's, like it's kind of, maybe it's platonically true in some loose sense that 7 is a prime number, but the concept of calling it a number and all the things we associate with numbers, like that's not like, that's much more in the realm of things we communicate among each other rather than things that are like kind of fundamentally absolutely true. I think that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult topic. How about another mathematician trying to address the problem?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything new to contribute to that big question, or whether it's discovered or invented. I think when doing mathematics, it feels like you're discovering something and you're exploring like a new world, so to speak. But then in relation to communication and agents, I almost feel like if you start with an agent, then an agent feels like it has to be a temporal being. And so sort of inherent in its structure is like this notion of, numbers, like natural numbers, if it's discrete, or like, a continuum of numbers, if it's, like that. So maybe this is like a Kantian perspective of like, okay, mathematics is like embedded in the structure of its experience. And then once it has to be doing coarse graining, then maybe it's very useful for it to repeat abstractions. And so there's like, so I mean, again, that's where like natural numbers come into play. Then there's like this spatial representation of its subjective experience. I mean, maybe putting aside consciousness or not for now, it's just like it has to represent states of the world in some way, and maybe it has to do that via some kind of like vector representation. And so again, like mathematics is sort of like there from the very get-go. And then I think I would say that like mathematics is just a useful thing to have for any agent working within reality at like a sufficiently competent level. And so it feels as though agents will sort of naturally have the shared like notion of like mathematics, and so that's like a common point for communication, perhaps. But and then on the other hand, there's stuff we spoke about before about like, well, maybe they use like different like base 10 or some base 12 or something like that. But that kind of feels more like a specific or just like a quirk rather than like a fundamental thing.
And I'm going to pass it to Kai but I will modify the question, so be ready. So I definitely thought a little bit about this question, and it feels like the math could be situated more on the edge of physics, right? Or within physics, so where we subjective humans, and then you have animals and things that are more distant from us, like phenomena in physics, and then there's something further in that direction that is math, that is even more sort of in the fundamental, far away side. And it feels like math is also behind us. Like I'm just whichever axis you want to see this, but it's behind within our own experience. And some people think this way. And I mentioned intuitionism. Some Mark van Houten and a few people studied Brouwer's point of view perspective on where math is. and it feels like maybe it is very much within us, and it doesn't have to be solipsistic. It could be phenomenological, like starting from a very experienced first study of what cognition is. And don't worry, Kai, I'm getting somewhere. It feels like, yeah, and what do you think about it? But it feels like at the end of the day, we have to communicate with concrete other agents to live our lives and care about them and also accomplish tasks. And the industry is all about communicating to different people, colleagues, and also our tools. So I want to ask you about extensions of ourselves and how it modifies our goals. It seems like we have to communicate, of course, with colleagues and friends. Those are extensions of ourselves. Once we communicate with them, we create this channel of signaling that is helpful, and we do things together, either in a collaborative manner or with certain tools, even the simplest ones like my glasses or I don't know, the blind person's cane. This is also a sensing one or a controlling one. It's also a tool like scissors or a pincer or AI or robots. It feels like there is something that we need to know about the theory of transferring goals to something else. In the simplest case, seems to be those scissors or something like a very simple tool, and other tools are more autonomous, and we have to now the problem seems more complex somehow. So I want to ask you about what's the nature of this signaling really between the tool and us, and how and I'm asking this question also because you have asked this first on on Discord, so this is on you. What do you think?
Yeah, geez, no, I wanted to ask this to other people, but I guess it's been flipped on me, right? Yeah, I think you know, I felt Martin and Nathaniel might have some interesting insights on this. You know, what is the sort of boundary between an agent and tools, right? So, but I guess I have to give a first pass at this before I hand it over. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if we're thinking about agents and goals, then you know, we're not sort of completely disembodied. We're living in a physical world. We have these concepts, ideas of tools, like a scissor is a very good one. As I mentioned, like glasses, you know, is that part of me as an agent? And yeah, we need to communicate goals with other users. So from a very sort of pragmatic hands-on experience, obviously people implementing AI systems, we sort of define the agents in advance, right? Like we're like, okay, this thing is the agent, we're coding it up. And, you know, in the case of something physical, like a robot as well, like we probably can say, okay, like this is, you know, this is the physical, you know, constraint of the robot. Probably you would also include like external sensors. So maybe if there are like cameras in the room, that also becomes part of the agent, right? Like that's something there. But then, yeah, you have something a little bit tricky, which is that you have tools, right? When does that become part of the agent? And I guess, you know, usually we would think that, no, we have this definition. Maybe in the case of a robot, it's a very physical thing. Maybe in the case of a human, it's a very physical thing. We have this thing that is more or less roughly the same thing over time, but it's not, you know, human bodies change over time. But we have something we can like attach and detach, and that's something we might think of as a tool. But obviously, the way we start thinking about goals and intentions and how do we control stuff really becomes dependent on the tools. If you were to extend this to how do we, you know, communicate goals and like try and do things shared across agents, then yeah, I think in a sense you've already approached that question. You're starting to think of, oh, okay, well, there are parts of the world that are also other agents, right? And in that case, you know, you don't have the sort of full control over them, and you probably have to, you know, communicate and share some goals and be able to work on this through some, you know, like shared values or something like that.
Yeah, so I guess it gives me an excuse to pontificate a bit about the boundaries of agents, if it's okay. Yeah, so Yeah, so we have this instinct that an agent ought to be something that has a boundary around it, right? There are things that are in the agent and there are things that are not in the agent, and that's like why do we have this instinct? Because I've come to think it's sort of wrong over the years. But I definitely used to have the same instinct, and maybe it's because, you know, like as an agent, like I see things kind of coming in to my eyes or whatever, right? You know, that those things are outside of me, and I'm sort of inside of me, and as a biological organism, I do have skin, so like, you know, there's a fairly obvious dividing line, at least at the macro scale, between what's inside me and what's outside me. But like, as you say, if I'm using a pair of scissors, like I don't have this like strong awareness of the scissors as being a separate thing from me. Like it's a really good example, actually. If you think about cutting a piece of paper with scissors, it's like you're just cutting the paper. You're not like interfacing with these scissors, which are a separate thing from you, and then it's the scissors that are cutting the paper. Not really. And so I think, yeah, this instinct is actually kind of wrong. That agents have boundaries in that sense at all. But at the same time, like, we are individuated. Like, so the thing that makes me an agent, I guess, is what I'm saying, isn't the fact that I have this like well-defined boundary. It's that the things that are all associated with me kind of have a shared fate, right? If I die, my heart dies, and also my brain dies, and also my belongings will get dispersed to the world eventually, right? So like it's about like a coming together of things and them having a sort of a shared fate. And then sort of mathematically what we're doing is like, when you think mathematically about agents, it's also really hard to let go of this notion that the agent has a boundary. You really want to say, well, this dynamical system is the agent and it couples to this dynamical system that's everything else. And it's kind of hard to talk about agents if you don't do it that way. But the thing that we've come to realize relatively recently, this is with Martin and also with Manuel Baltieri and Matteo Capucci, other collaborators, is that you can just make every possible choice if you want. So the point is, you have this goal that's like your value judgment. You've decided the agent is trying to follow this goal. Specifying a goal doesn't require you to specify the agent's boundary necessarily, right? You want to say, my goal is to not die. You're saying, you know, my goal is to have my body temperature in this range, my heart to be beating at this rate. Those are just variables of things in the world. You don't have to draw a boundary around them if you don't want to. So you have this goal, you have this system. You can then choose to partition the system into multiple parts, right? So you could say, okay, the goal is for Nathaniel to be alive, and the agent is the camera. And that kind of doesn't make sense, right? Like, because the camera doesn't have to do anything to keep me alive. Like that from the camera's perspective, that just happens or doesn't. Like it's so that's not a very good agent. It's not a very informative choice to put the boundary there. Right. Whereas you could say the goal is to keep Nathaniel alive, and then the boundary is around like my skin or me including my clothes or whatever, and that will just make much more sense. Like you know, that this is an agent that could potentially do something incredibly stupid somehow to die. I don't know. Right. And I'm not doing that. So that's kind of brings you more explanatory power. And we talked about this notion of models that you can kind of get through doing this. So I'm again not going to go into detail, but the point is that depending on where you draw the boundary, the notion of model will be different. So if I keep a lot of notes in my iPad and I forget a lot of things, if you draw the boundary just around me, then you'll have to attribute a model where I guess stepping back a bit, an example from a paper by Clark and Chalmers called The Extended Mind. The example is a man called Otto who doesn't remember where he lives. He writes in a notebook. So if you draw the boundary just around Otto and not the notebook, then you have to attribute a model where that person doesn't know where they live, but they do know that it's written in the notebook. So if they're asked where they live, they will look it up in the notebook and then they'll know and then they'll say. But if you draw the boundary around Otto, including the notebook, then you will end up with an agent that in fact just does know where they live, right? And those are both correct choices, because I don't think there is a correct choice of where to draw the boundary. Rather, the thing you should do is to notice that you can draw it in multiple places and you'll have multiple different interpretations of the system as an agent. And I think I probably didn't answer everything Kai asked, and I can't remember the rest of it. So if there's ask me again, like now or later, if there's anything else. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, I think this is like a framework that is not, if you probably start poking it, will very quickly crumble. But I quite like the idea that goals are basically future states of the world, and these goals sort of infest like agentic bodies or like computational bodies, and then these goals these future states manifest themselves through the actions of these computational agentic bodies. And that way you can start thinking about the fact that future states or like goals can infest like one body, and then that body can then tell another body, like by converting them or manipulating them in some way, being like, now you should also take actions to steer the world towards this future state. And then just a fun framework to think about. But I think it's also going to be more informative when thinking about like this, say, post-human condition or whatever, where we can like modify our bodies very easily. Like maybe for whatever reason I've got the goal that I want to live on Mars or like another planet or whatever, then my physical body that I normally think of as the primary thing that that's me or whatever, then this body's no longer adapted for that kind of goal, for manifesting that goal. Okay, I mean, that's not the greatest example for various reasons, but anyway, let's just roll with it. So then, then maybe it's better for me to like deconstruct my body, form a new form of body that will allow me to live on this other planet or whatever. I probably have some other things to say about that framework, but I just think it's somewhat interesting.
I think that's really great. So let me take a turn at this, which I shouldn't be doing because I'm moderating this, but because of what you said, I was going to make a short remark about this. You are eliciting my being longer about it. Won't be too long. How about this image, which you're familiar with, what we worked on with Mike, which is the light cones of care. And we can call that care, but you can call that goals easily. And first, without caring about goals, first, I think there are two levels, right? There is the low level and the high level description of things. And the lower level, closer to the atom and dynamics of the system itself, the past being down here, future being up there. You have a sort of light cone, right, that crosses at the present. And I view exactly that. I view goals also in the future this way. If it's a game of chess, something that we understand a bit better, it's all the future board positions are up there, and I don't know which one I'm going to reach. And my goals can be formulated in the sets of the ones that I'm more aiming at, right? And you can have numbers on that. And you have you know a lot about your past. You don't know much about your future, especially because there are other agents. But even if there are two or even one, that can be the case. Now that's the lower image, and you can ask the question about information transfers between the past and the future. You can ask about the bandwidth, and that's something you can ask also about the tools, right? The glasses, the robots, the whatever tools and other things that are more or less autonomous. You can also ask about causality, right? How causal things are, and I think those are very powerful tools that we should use when talking about this. Now that's the low level. The higher level is, forget about this being the low-level description, and consider that we are talking about goal space now. So how the old goal spaces translate into the future. And I think that gives us a very different kind of insight. It's hard to, it's less clear than the board position, but imagine that those are points in the space in the light cone now. And we transfer those goals, we change, and of course, the light cone moves as we move into the future. And you can ask those same questions, and there are things that affect it about autonomy. And this, I think, allows us, and we work on this with Alyssa and others, to classify types of tools with respect to their bottlenecks, their bandwidth, right? How much information can transfer at a time, or how much causality there is between back and forth, but also how you transfer and constrain goals on one end or the other. Right? So there are tools that you may not think much about this, but they constrain the way you are formulating your goals. And the notebook is a very strong, like a high level example of this. But even the scissors, you kind of really want to cut things now that you have them in your hand, right? It's a baby example, but tools do affect you because you are somehow somehow have this possibility of connection with them now, and them existing in your vicinity and you using them changes that. That's one simple example. There's something to say about, you said belonging earlier, and I think belonging has to have a causal definition and a boundary. So part of my body or not, right? The glasses, right? And all of that. But I leave it to that. So I think there's something very important about looking at that light cone and what does happen when we translate between microstate to the goal version of the light cone. And yeah, that's something that we're working on. I think can give us some insights.
I don't have any answers to this really, but the thing I'm now like, there are these. So Paul said, and I think what Nathaniel said is also kind of related, that goals are things in the world or futures. You said also, somebody said they're like future states. I think Paul said this, and I think in the framework that Nathaniel was talking about, goals are kind of subsets of the states of the universe and that's kind of you like, and basically those two things are kind of the same thing, because like the subset that Nathaniel was talking about is just a subset of states that we want to stay in forever. So that's how you turn this subset into the goal. That's kind of the goal. And then you can kind of say what you said, to have like states in the future is also where you say, oh, I don't need the universe to be in this subset right now. I need it to be in this subset in the future. That's a variation, but you can treat it kind of similarly. But so that's one thing, but there is this other thing that, because in this picture, goals really are, can I say physical? They're not, maybe it's hard to say whether they're physical, but they are like real, or they're properties of the actual of reality.
By that, do you mean in the example of the chess board, there are future board sets of them?
Exactly, and the chessboard exists. Like if the chessboard exists, it has, there are futures of the universe where the chessboard is in all these different configurations, no?
Right.
And that's
so are some goals more abstract than that? So my example being controlling the center is a goal, and that's what I meant by higher level, right? So, or is it just in your description,
but that's
just
still,
micro?
No, that's still something I would call a feature of reality. So that's because that's not the abstraction. I'm not going for the difference between abstraction and more or less abstract goals, like micro state goals or macro state goals, because those can still be those can, like, it can still be macro states of the actual universe. But the thing is that there's like goals that are like not features of the universe, no? Like that's the thing, like, because like in this there's two perspectives. One perspective is goals are things, properties of the real world, and the other one is goals are things inside models of agents. And of course the goals inside models of agents can be very, very different from things that happen in the real world, like the pot of gold or whatever. Like, so yeah, I just wanted to highlight this distinction, and I don't really know yet how to completely merge these two. Like, what's the synthesis of these two views? I don't know it, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that there's probably an interesting relationship between tools and the ability for an agent to, I guess, come up with goals or think about, or I guess like have goals. And I think one of the way that they intersect is this idea of modeling. And I think that as an agent, it can be, at least for me, it can, well, maybe it's not hard to come up with a goal, but it seems like the way that I come up with a goal is different depending on my model of the world. So if I have one model of the world, like for example, like if I didn't know language or I didn't know how society worked, I would certainly have some sort of goals that look one way, versus if I had access to a supercomputer that could predict the stock market and I knew all the information about everybody and I have a whole team of people who is constantly stalking everybody on social media, my goals are going to be completely different than the previous example. And the difference here is the tools. But in particular, these kinds of tools are ones that are able to do some sort of modeling. So I would say that maybe in the second example, when I have like access to a supercomputer or all these resources or a team of people that do all of this computation for me, like that in some sense is a part of this, you know, like Nathaniel said, it's sort of like this, I can include it in my boundary. And in this sense, I'm saying that I'm including all of these tools as a very large extended agent that's able to compute these different computations. But in such a way, I'm able to take in more information about about my environment, and I'm able, but because of that, I can. It seems like the idea of having such tools is to come up with an accurate model of how the world works such that I can make very precise goals. So I don't know. I guess like are there, I want to ask Nathaniel if you have thoughts on this connection between tools and modeling.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm just collecting my thoughts briefly. So yeah, one thing that really struck me is the idea of needing to have an accurate model to kind of come up with accurate goals. I think that's kind of really interesting because I've always been thinking of it the other way around. Like if the agent has the goal, then it must have the model, right? And for some kinds of goal, the goal doesn't force you to have much of a model, but for some kinds of goal, having that goal or being able to achieve that goal forces you to have a really complex model. So I never really thought about it the other way around. They're like, okay, if I want to come up with a goal, I'm going to have a good model first. So I got to think a bit more about that. But yeah, on this relationship between tools and models, I think, yeah, it's I mean, it, like for me, it kind of comes down to what I said not very accurately before about yeah, you've got a team of people around you who like do stuff for you. Like, I mean, yeah, like a famous person is kind of a good example, I think, sometimes. Like if you're a really famous person, on the one hand, they're a human being and they have their like day-to-day experience. They get up, they eat breakfast and so on, and you know, they're an agent. But like on the other hand, the interface they present to the world, like you can't speak to them, right? You've got to speak to somebody else. And so like there's like a bigger boundary as well around that person, and they're like an agent within an agent somehow. And then, you know, because of that, the human person doesn't have to worry about all of the stuff that's being done by these other people outside them, but the organization as a whole kind of still does have to worry about it. So like, I guess it's just another example of there being like two nice places to put the boundary. Yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah. So maybe there are no answers. Oh, maybe there are no answers, but I think I definitely agree with the things that you said, and it really makes me think about. I don't know. It just gives me a lot to think about. Yeah.
I was wondering if we could go to Kai because of the conversation going on Discord. Would you like to relay some of that and some of your thoughts?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think we already sort of covered these points. You know, this idea of, you know, what is the boundary between an agent and tools that it uses, and you know, I thought it's interesting you brought up this sort of light cone idea, and really interested to hear, you know, the research that you're going to be doing on ideas on information and causality and how that can be used to like link these things. I think that'd be very interesting, and you know, also, you know, I'm very interested in the practical perspective. So, you know, if we're trying to get agents to do useful things, then, you know, can measures like mutual information or causality be a ways for them to try and understand, you know, tool use, goals even, right, and what they can do in the world. Because, you know, this is, you know, the sort of challenge I've been alluding to a lot is, you know, grounding and what sort of shared knowledge or representations do agents have, and you know, is some sort of coarse graining, some sort of you know, mutual information between coarse grained things in the world, like objects, causal dependencies, the way we can, you know, really try and get agents to think and act in ways that we expect them to do. You know, I have no idea if this is the solution, but maybe it's part of the solution. I think one of the issues we have with alignment of systems is that, you know, they're not embodied. We do give them a lot of data from humans, you know, of like our natural language and, you know, videos, images, etc., that are taken from the physical world. But you know, there's a lot of people out there who are like, okay, well, you're just passively ingesting information. Are you really going to be able to, you know, form the correct world models if you aren't able to intervene on the data, right? It can be very difficult to do that without the ability to do this sort of thing. So yeah, you know, I think some of this stuff might be abstract, but would be very interesting to see, you know, what the practical the practical output of this could be, and you know, maybe it's even going to be solving, you know, helping us solve some issues along alignment as well.
Amazing, and thank you for bringing that up. I think this is exactly where we're headed at the end of the week of this this conference. So maybe Paul, what do you think? Paul, what do you think? Because you said the word alignment in your introduction, and we've been talking about this a lot. And I guess there are different parts in communication. Part of communication we talked about, I think, on Monday, Tuesday, is about control and how you manipulate. And there's a lot of scary words in there. At the end of the day, it's also true, right? When you collaborate with someone, you want to control them a little bit. You want to cause responses in them. So I think all that wording is sort of fine. Collaboration requires this sort of mutual causation control. Now, how do we deal with this alignment of those higher things, those goals, right, within this communication system? How can we understand that as a bridge to the conversation we'll have tomorrow?
Could you maybe repeat the question but more condensed?
What to do about alignment of goals?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very tricky. I mean, yeah, one way to think about training AI systems and trying to get them to have the right goals is that there is a form of communication happening. You know, they do some action, we observe that action, we interpret it, like, was it good or bad, and then we give some kind of reinforcement, or, well, okay, you know, this is like in particular form of training, give some reinforcement, and then hopefully in the future it's more aligned, it starts giving the right outputs and so on and so forth. Yeah, and then the question, the big question in alignment is like, well, how do we, if we have some kind of goal that or some kind of behavior that we want it to have, how do we communicate to the system to have the right goals? And, it could be the case that, well, like, for example, when you're bringing up a child, you give it positive reinforcement when it does good things and so on and so forth, but then maybe internalizes, maybe for whatever reason, it starts manipulating you, starts lying to you, starts hiding what its true intentions are or whatever. So yeah, I think I don't have anything super new to say today, but yeah, I think it's just a challenging problem. It's like, well, yeah, how do we communicate goals into other systems? And I guess what's different about, with AI systems is that we're sort of, in theory, like able to train them from the ground up. We have a lot of control over the selection pressure we put on it. But then there's this, big problem where it's like, well, we can only constrain them insofar as we can evaluate. We can't necessarily evaluate them sufficiently well. So if you're trying to employ someone for a job and, maybe they just want to get the job so that they can then do something else and, like steal some money from you or whatever. If they're very good at manipulating you, then there's no way to differentiate their actions. Or there's no way to differentiate between them and an honest person who wants to get the job for good reasons, just based on their outputs alone. So, I don't think I have like anything super concrete to say there, but it's just the overall vibe.
Yeah, Nathaniel.
Yeah, I guess it like a question that's sort of in my head generally around the discussion is about the origin of goals. Like, where do goals come from? Why do things have goals? I mean, like, I sort of said it's a value judgment imposed by an observer, and that's true, but it's like, what causes things to exist such that value judgment gives you predictive power, right? And I think this is like, it seems like an important question from that perspective as well, because you talked about like communicating what goals for something to have, but well, I'm not a parent, maybe somebody who is can confirm, but I believe you can't tell a child what goals to have. So that's like an interesting thing, right? They just sort of have them. And maybe understanding why would be a really valuable and helpful thing, like what causes things to start having goals.
Mm-hmm.
I have some quick thoughts on that. Some interesting work that's been done about this is like value formation, and the idea that, for example, in humans we have reward circuitry, and once we have some like tasty food, then there's like a reward signal that's sent, and then around that we have like the neocortex and like the brain in general, which is like a very flexible learning system, like a very flexible neural network. And then from that reward signal, around this reward signal, like starts to congregate all this like machinery for like planning and achieving like that kind of reward over long horizons and so on and so forth. And then things get more complicated because that kind of circuitry that's now been developed for planning can be repurposed for other goals. And then that becomes, things become quite flexible in that sense. We can just come up with goals on the fly. Like someone can say, oh, can you do this? And we can just repurpose that developed machinery to pursue that goal. And then we're in a situation where we now have like these retargetable agents, like human beings, where, maybe we were trained for one goal, but by basically having certain inputs, we can now pursue other goals like very efficiently. And so that's like one big problem within alignment of where, okay, maybe we've trained these models very well, they have good goals for some period of time, and then people prompt the language models in a certain way, or the AI starts like self-reflecting or whatever, and then it applies its cognition to pursuing a completely different kind of goal. Just some thoughts on that.
I think some like the naive thing, I guess, to say is that goals are the thing, like having goals is like enables you to stay alive, maybe in some way. Like that should be like, it seems maybe you don't even, I guess, like the goal the goal of survival itself seems actually kind of very abstract and difficult, like a high level goal. Like I'm not sure a cell can actually represent this in some way, whatever that really means. But maybe it's like that, like some proxy goals that if you can pursue them, then that means that you're gonna stick around, and then that just keeps on. Then there's like other goals that if you can pursue them, then you can stick around even longer, and then like that keeps on going. Maybe, I don't know.
So there's one answer from Nathaniel, another one from Nitch, but I want to acknowledge, because we're over time, I have to let Kai go. I know you have a thing. So thank you so much for coming with us and having this wonderful discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the fun discussion. All right, see you around. Bye.
See you, Kai.
And then we'll continue just a little bit. Nathaniel first, and then Nitch.
Okay. I mean, I've had conversations about this with Nitch before, so he might be saying something similar. I don't know, but it does connect to a long-running series of conversations about how there may be kind of goals that are universal in some sense, like curiosity might be one of them. So if you have some long-term goal, a good thing to do to start with is probably learn a bunch of stuff that's related to it, right? So the kind of skill, the goal of learning something is like a pretty universal thing. Another one is empowerment, which is this thing that's studied by Daniel Polanyi's group. Martin knows quite a bit about it, where you put yourself in a position such that you can kind of influence the world around you. So I like to think, if you're put in a garage, there's like, you're in this garage just like full of junk, and you're told tomorrow someone's going to tell you what the goal is. Like, what are you going to do? You're probably going to open all the boxes, find out what's there, maybe clear a desk, put some tools where you can reach them. Like, regardless of what the goal is, those are very useful things to do. And like, unless the person says the next morning, oh, the goal is for the garage to be completely in the same state it originally was, then that was a bad idea. But for many possible goals, those things will be good ideas. And how did I get onto this? I was kind of responding to what Martin said.
Helping you to stay around.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so if you say like, this organism's goal is to stay alive, like it might have like a really super specific, super specialized way of doing it, but for most organisms, it's actually better to be adaptable, and so there might be these kind of universal goals that we sort of all have. But I think somebody else had a question.
So we'll go to Nitch and then Richard.
Okay, it's kind of funny because I was going to ask some questions, but people kept answering them before I was able to ask them. So that was quite nice. So this might randomize the conversation a little bit, in which case feel free to skip over it. But one of the, this whole how do you create new goals thing, and like what constitutes a good new goal to create. I mean, that's been a thing that's been bothering me for quite a while, and we've talked about it. There's also a connection to open-endedness there, which is to say, like, when you have this sort of chain of behaviors and goals, and new goals are created as a result of agents or whatever interacting around the old goals and so on and so on, are there sort of ways in which the original grounding, like the sort of the root of the tree of goals, is never lost? Or can the system become completely detached from its grounding? I mean, of course, like you can intentionally try to make a goal that has nothing to do with your grounding, and it might be like trying to write a sci-fi truly alien that it's actually kind of hard from a just like a cognitive sense. But if you don't artificially try to do it, what is the way that grounding either preserves or gets diluted as agents start to churn and get away from the sort of baseline hard-coded reward system and start to co-opt that for their own purposes or for their own based on their essentially learned models rather than the evolutionary learned model.
Someone want to address that?
Interesting.
Interesting, yes. Yeah, I like it too, and I don't know. Yeah.
I don't have like, I don't know, like kind of a trivial response is like maybe once there's a certain level of general intelligence, then the system can then go into its brain or its neural network or whatever, and then start rewiring itself arbitrarily. So potentially it could get rid of any traces of like the history of that goal formation. Yeah, maybe there's like no limits to that. Obviously, there is always going to be some kind of like causal history in the universe or whatever, but yeah, maybe it can, just by self-modifying, it can get rid of a lot of that. I'm not so sure.
Is that death?
Well, as in, like, yeah, as in, like, for the so-called self, or 'cause,
Well,
you could have the body like sort of continuing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the reason I bring it up is because if you try to do this like by hand in a machine learning
Oh.
context, usually the thing just kind of goes. You get very quickly the kind of noise room problem or a dark room problem or things like that. Like if one single optimization process can control both the goal and the means of achieving it, that's very unstable, and so the thing will tend to crash. So if you had an agent that didn't crash, like, I guess this is why I ask, maybe the grounding does actually have to preserve, not just because like the universe is hard to escape, but actually because if you don't maintain a connection, you crash off into an attractor really easily, and all sophisticated behavior would just stop.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I mean, like this, what this makes me think of is this thing that you kind of maybe what you can't drop is, or what you cannot make, or one thing that seems productive in keeping fixed is the way you update beliefs. If you have beliefs and you follow a rule for updating beliefs and that you never get to change, then you can try to basically influence your future beliefs. But if so let's say your beliefs are actually updating according to Bayes, surprise, surprise, then actually the way you then trying to influence your future beliefs, actually you're not, that's not obvious how to do this. Like you can't, like that's actually an intricate problem basically. How do I, if my beliefs are always updating according to Bayes, how do I make myself believe in something? That's, yeah, it's a really non-trivial problem, and you kind of basically have to create inputs so that so that according to your model, these inputs make you believe in this particular thing. And then if you want to believe, for example, that if I want myself to believe that I have a lot of money, actually the only real way I can think of is that I get a lot of money. Because if I kind of, I don't know, go to my computer account on look at my bank account and just cross the number out and write like a big one there. It's like, I'm not gonna believe it. And even if I make this in a very sophisticated way, I don't know, like make it really look like this is my bank account, it's not gonna work. Like I kind of yeah, I mean that's so this is like one thing, maybe, I don't know, just one idea to fix something that maybe has to stay fixed so that you don't get this crash of your agent or death or whatever you want to call it.
Richard?
I had a very specific, I have a specific application in mind that I can just kind of discuss later. But so I'm asking this question, and my apologies if it's a very naive question. But are we understanding the role of or the relationship between goals and incentives? So I guess what I'm asking is, in Martin's example, and this is a very, this is a silly example. I haven't given a lot of thought, but the incentive, if you make a lot of money, you might have a, very unhappy life, or you can have a very happy life and not make a lot of money. There's just incentives, right? Like, and then there's the whole, then it gets a little bit complicated, right? Because then there's this role of choice, right? Like you kind of choose, whatever you want. And then, but then also with incentives, there's like this element of risk, so, if you decide to do this, right, it might be risky and you might lose. And I have a very specific application in mind. I don't want to, say it on the YouTube, but and happy to discuss it offline. But just, sorry, a very naive question, but I'm just kind of curious how you guys are trying to understand how incentives come in, or if not, if that's a second order or like a much more complicated thing, you want to understand it much more in a very simple, just this is the goal. Let's try to understand that first before we add any more complication. That's fine. I'm just kind of curious. Thanks.
I mean, I'm thinking a bit off the cuff here because I never really thought about the relationships between goals and incentives, but I kind of feel like they are in the same class of thing. Like, if someone is really incentivized by money, I might say their goal is to make money, right? And then, but we haven't really talked about how goals relate to sub-goals, and I think that's really important here, right? So if someone's incentivized by money, like that's like in some way like a big broad goal that they have, but then they might, like, in service of that.
There's a set of sub-goals underneath that you need to, like, I need to go to Harvard or whatever, and then work for Goldman Sachs, whatever it is. If I want to be happy, right? Yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically my first thought on that, right? That maybe incentives are sort of broad goal related to broad goals, and then specific goals are related to sort of sub goals.
And my first response was that it might be embodied, the embodiment of goals, or the distribution of goals. How it's sort of a top-down theory of that, but so you gather your goal, you get that, and it might be having this amazing career, being happy, whatever it is, and then you distribute that into the actions that you're going to take. You're trying to make sure you go to college. You're buying this book. You're reading this. You're reading. You distribute that into things that engage. You do that socially. You do that within your body. Me taking this book in my hand makes it much more likely that I'm going to read it. There are things like that that's what I call distribution here. I think there's something about goals being sent, being present in your embodiment, so you can see almost those sort of causal flows of your goal being, if you had a coloring kind of exercise of where your goals are more likely to be realized and what are the causal links, they will come from some red areas that are, this is going to make it, and this is very unlikely to do it. And so for example, this area will be, it's very likely this causes the thing to happen, right? It's not really, it's dynamical space, it's not really physical space, but yeah, it sort of, because of the light cone thing, I tend to think a lot in those.
Can it come up with its own goals, or do we have to kind of tell them? Like, is sorry, it's another naive question. Is the agent, though, the way we're understanding it, is it can it come up with its own goals, or do we have to just like with little kids, right? They kind of come in, they don't know much about the world, but we tell them these, we kind of train them, and then they get to decide what they want to do. So I mean, we're under the assumption here that agents some outside agent or some other entity needs to tell the agent what the goals and / embodiment, through incentives are. Am I correct? So just a clarification.
That's a very good, that's a very good point. I think it could be both. You can self-cause your goal. It's, again, you is making an assumption about the boundaries, which is sort of annoying, but that's what it is. And it can be a set, right, of those patterns. So that makes it okay. Those patterns propagate, and within them, this goal can emerge. And I think that's what you said, Martin, earlier about the difference between this, or was it someone else? The emergence maybe of those goals versus, you could also pass them. They can come from somewhere else. You can read them and, oh, this makes sense. I do this now. Or someone else can tell you the scissors are being told they're cutting.
Yeah, I just want to say the creation of goals is much less well understood, I think. I think we understand that, I think we can kind of understand what it means to have a goal, but what it means to come up with goals, I think we're much further away.
Yeah, maybe just quickly. I think another thing that's interesting is, like, you can have these instrumental sub goals that come up, like seeking power, or like developing technology, or going to prestigious school so that you can get a job, and so on and so forth. And then those sub goals can become like kind of reified, or like condensed in the system, and then you can have like a single body that has like many sub goals, and then it sort of might be modeled as like several different sub agents existing within the body. And then you can have like these sub agents have conflicts with each other. You can have cooperation, and so on and so forth. I just think it's interesting. But yeah, we're running out of time.
I think Thomas went first.
Thomas, question.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure I understood Nicholas' question correctly, but what I thought I heard was a question about how we can, how might an agent be able to come up with goals that somehow radically go beyond what it was to begin with. I'm not sure if that captures much of what you had in mind, Nicholas, but if it goes along those lines, then again, I was thinking of the being attentive to the goals of other agents. That would seem to be a way that you can introduce radically different goals, goals that would seem inconceivable to the original agent, and yet they become the driving motivation for the agent. This sort of deliberate pursuit of bending and taking care of the goals of others. I don't know if that was related or not, but thank you in any case.
Yeah, I think it's connected. I guess if I gave the whole talk on subjective open-endedness, these things would be clearer, but that's a whole talk. I think that is a mechanism in the sense, like, we don't talk about it necessarily coming from the one agent looking at other agents to make their goals, but rather other agents gather together into societies, and the sort of actions of the society naturally create things that can be referenced, like new sorts of state or new sorts of function over state that are meaningful only because of what the other agents are doing and wouldn't be meaningful in isolation. And so, like, that's sort of a mechanism by which the open-endedness of, or that we propose the open-endedness of things like art operate, as opposed to like the open-endedness of biology necessarily, if they're different. But the sort of thing that I wonder is, like, when you do that, can you immediately, like, if you become totally disconnected from the world when you do that, is it kind of death in the sense, like, do you cut the sort of necessary tensions that keep agents from just creating goals that they can immediately satisfy. Like you could get 10 people to all just congratulate each other and sit around a table saying, you know, Bob, you know, you're breathing really well today. Oh, you know, thank you, Greg. You're breathing really well too. And now we're all happy and we're all satisfied and it's a dark room and we're done. And those 10 people just like drop out of society entirely because they're just basically mutually congratulatory. And like that's enough of a parable that we talk about it. So something like it probably does happen. But in things like the pursuit of science or art, we also seem to escape those traps, or we have, like when we've gotten trapped in those traps, we also get out of them, or not everyone gets trapped in them, and so the endeavor continues. And so I'm wondering, like, or I was wondering, just like as an idea, is maybe the important thing that the original grounding is not entirely destroyed. That it's not just something that is made up, you know, like in talking about whether math is discovered or invented, right? You could invent mathematics that is totally disconnected from the universe, or that you could try your hardest to make it disconnected from the universe. You probably can't succeed like writing a sci-fi alien, but you could try to make the kind, you know, there's a joke, right, about a conference, and a mathematician is tired of doing all these highly abstract things, so they go to a talk called The Theory of Gears. And the talk begins, the theory of gears with a integer real number of teeth is well established, but I would like to continue to the theory of gears with a complex number of teeth. You know, you could try to do that, but in some sense, we also don't do that so much. Like even the furthest branches of math, someone tries to connect them to something real and usually succeeds.
Although that's often after the fact. I think there's plenty of examples where maths was done for its own sake, and it's like totally abstract way, utterly disconnected from any application, but then it just somehow turned out to be useful later on. Now, having said that, I ought to come up with examples, and I'm not really sure I can, but I think it's happened quite often in physics, maybe also cryptography. Yeah.
Did I hear own sake as in math is an agent?
Oh.
Sorry, I'm just being provocative, but I'm always half serious.
Mimetic agents now.
That's right. Jean.
Yes. Thank you. I'm learning so much as a non-academic person, coming from a tech background, learning so much about agents and goals, which brings me to this question that I keep thinking about, also because I'm inspired by an entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley, that speaks about the very emotional and passionate approach and curiosity of humans towards aligning AI with humans when we as a humanity, as a species, we're not aligned. So I wonder, as the experts that you guys are in academia and the research that you've done, how important do you think is as a species, our alignment within and among each other with these goals, whether to not kill each other or whatnot? How important is that, or not important, in aligning AI machines and AI systems? Because I feel like both are such complicated, very complex. It might need a larger time scale. But yeah, I'm curious about that. Like, what can you share really quickly about that? Are we even aligned? Or anything at all about human alignment, and then how it's going to impact alignment of AI?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good point. I think about it quite a lot. Like I think from what little I know about AI alignment, because I'm not at all an expert on that, but I think that there's often this sort of imagined thing where the thing that will be an agent is the AI, right? So that the AI is going to be an agent, and then it's going to have its own goals. We better make sure it has the right ones. But I think there's also, like, you could also choose to worry about aligned AI a lot more in a way, right? Because yeah, human goals aren't aligned, and I mean, to the extent that AI is a thing that has goals, it currently gets them entirely from us. I don't think there really are any AIs beyond things in evolutionary simulations or whatever, but I don't think there really are any AIs that get their own goals by themselves. So I guess I'm just saying I agree, really. Yeah. But you, the real
Yeah, no, that's really, yeah, a good point. That's something that Olaf and I have been talking about, and also Thomas, who was here. Yeah, it's this idea that if we build AI systems that are aligned to human users, then essentially what we're doing is empowering humans, and we're sort of amplifying their capacity to take actions in the world. And then if humans aren't aligned with one another, if we're conflicting, then we sort of have like an amplified capacity to push in one direction, another person's going to push in the other direction with these AI assistants, and then that could sort of amplify the possibility of conflict and like catastrophic outcomes that result from that kind of conflict. So yes, that's definitely something to bear in mind. Like another approach is to try and build AI systems that somehow like dissipate this conflict. So for example, with ChatGPT, it's trained to be helpful, but also it's trained to be harmless. So if you ask it to, like do something, tell me how to make a bomb, it won't tell you to do that. Well, I mean, unless you jailbreak it or whatever. And so the idea there is that it's sort of been trained to, not cause harm to others, to be helpful, but under the constraints that it shouldn't be harming others. And so something like that seems to be, moving away from this like empowering each human who may be misaligned to sort of, dampening that potential for, I guess, like conflict and harming others. And then maybe you could have like, you could have governments that can mitigate conflicts between people and so on and so forth. And potentially you could have AI systems that have that kind of role as well. But yeah, it's important to think about these things.
I think there's a lot of threads going on. Let's keep discussing, but I think let's call it a day for the stream. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending until now. Tomorrow we'll continue exactly on those premises, I guess. We'll talk about diverse intelligences, and especially about the philosophy in ethics. And I guess, we'll touch again on technology and how to communicate goals and more between those intelligences.
All right, well, that's it for today's session. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm wondering, is a sock puppet an agent? Did we answer this question today? Oh, right. I might need a microphone. Let's try that again. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us. My sock puppet is laughing at me, but you can't hear him because I'm the one who's controlling the voice. I have the tool of the voice. Are you sure about that? I think I can always make you talk when I want to make you talk. Ah. Okay. All right. That's enough sock puppet. But actually, I want to know what YouTube thinks about a sock puppet. Is a sock puppet an agent? After listening to the discussion today, I want you to go into the comment and say if a sock puppet is an agent, yes or no. Please say yes. My life depends on it. All right. So don't forget to join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. Japan time for our last and final session about the ethics and philosophy of diverse intelligences. We have another really great lineup of panelists and moderators, so you don't want to miss it at all. All right. And that's it for today. See you tomorrow. Bye.